Welcome. My name is Christopher Peter. I read the book, the one that captures the attention of the political pundits across America, covering a topic that some want to simply leave in the past while others want to use it as fuel for their political hatred of Democrats. Original Sin: President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again, co-written by Jake Tapper of CNN and Alex Thompson of Axios. First off, I did not go into the book with a thirst for any attacks on Joe Biden, and his recent cancer diagnosis did not deter my desire to read it either. My intention was to experience what might have happened during a presidential administration that clearly was not like any other, and not in a good way, a peek into what people had to say about what was done and why. I fully understood that there is a potential that this book could be just a ruse to give cover for a president that writers may want the public to have more sympathy for in the midst of being pushed off the ticket, see the replacement not perform well, and to save any respect for a political legacy spanning over a half a century. Normally, I feel similar to others who are not fans of anonymous sources. I do think if you are going to break confidence and shed light on what someone potential did or was not able to do, then it would help your credibility if it makes sense that you would truly have seen and witnessed what you claim. Otherwise, readers will have to hold some doubt over what it read regardless of how convincing it appears. But politics and government are not kind to those that can be made to seem disloyal or self-interested at the expense of others. For many in the previous administration, they have a political future ahead of themselves and families that they need to provide for. Depending on how the public receives the information, they can still salvage their careers. Another point of skepticism for myself was seeing that Jake Tapper, a person who has been critical of President Trump and anyone who has made claims about the capability of Joe Biden, was involved. I have watched Tapper at times, but I was not sure how a person questioning the credibility of claims that are now being pointed out as true by that person can be trusted. Pundits and news anchors work for media corporations and conglomerates that requires them to toe the company line at times. I get it. Sometimes you may have to make the bosses happy even if it means that you lean in a manner that you may not feel is completely justifiable, or simply advancing a case that it does not bother you if it is made. So what were my thoughts? First, I thought the book was a good read or listen if you were experiencing the audiobook version like I did. I think it was important to hear about the level that people went to accommodate the decline of Joe Biden, who was late in life when running for the presidency. After experiencing the book, it is clear that Joe Biden was not really in control of the White House, even though it seemed like there was an argument being subtly made that he was still capable of governing. It was clear that Biden was a part-timer at best. He clearly was not working full days like any of his predecessors. The book does not really question his ability to govern, or at least states many times that Biden could still make sound decisions. But this was surrounded by comments that the information he received was being extremely managed. Was he really making the decision or just going through the motions to reach a decision already made by people around him long before? Based on the book, it stated that Biden was graded on a curve, where it was clear that staff watered down information into easier-to-digest messaging, changed schedules to accommodate his need for rest or requests from family members that he needs to rest. He simply seemed like he couldn't handle the challenges of being president and needed his team to take up the slack or at the very least make it manageable, like a kid struggling with homework. But the book would not completely acknowledge that and went to great lengths to defend Joe Biden by trying to insert commentary on Trump when the moment was clearly about what the public saw from Joe Biden. For instance, in the discussion about the debate, there were excuses made using Trump being not better, but I think everyone watching took away Biden's performance and Trump's one-liners immediately preceding those blunders. Not much else. There were many moments where the authors deflected blame using Trump as a target, and may have tried to carry the idea that Biden was a good president besides the physical infirmities. But they really never account for the fact that 4 out of 5 people did not like the direction under Biden, which they did acknowledge that stat. The only people who were not falling for the scheme were Republicans, who suspected early on that Joe Biden was not the same person at all as the man who was vice president. Interestingly, Tapper talks about confronting one of the people about why they did what they did, and they rightfully pushed back about the media making it so easy for them to do it because they did not question anything. I did have more empathy for Joe Biden after experiencing the book. As with other presidents in our history, he had more than his fair share of tragedies that impacted how he managed his way in the world. So I found that interesting. I do not think it excuses the behaviors or decisions that led from his methods, but you at least understood the why. I think it is important to read regardless of if you are a Democrat or Republican because it is something we need to know as possible. Joe Biden is not the first president where his team or staff had to go to great lengths to accommodate him. We have had a history of presidents throughout time dealing with many things that were kept out of the public eye well before the modern era and from our earliest founding. But the media is supposed to shed light on what happens in the dark regardless of party or person. They completely had no interest in holding a president accountable that they supported because he was from a party many of them are affiliated with. The real villain is not just Biden or his staff, but the press, the so-called protector of democracy.
There was a great effort by the writers to make Joe Biden sympathetic to the public. I think some of the stories gave great insight into his line of thinking, but also served to excuse the fact he does not live in the truth. And sometimes the truth is unfortunately kept from him. It was clear as day from the book that Joe Biden uses narratives to manage his situations, whether to make it on the other side of personal tragedies or manage his political career. Now, he is not the only person in the world that does this. My contention is not that he needs these mind traps to get through the day. We see that throughout society where people create constructs to help them with their careers or manage tough times. Athletes use it to face adversity and succeed in competition. My problem with it is when you are so quick and reckless to classify others as dishonest when you cannot be honest with yourself. And this is not health-related dishonesty. I think we can all feel for the challenges and tragedy that Joe had to overcome. The loss of a wife, children, and elections. Health crises all played a part in the journey of our 46th president. We can sympathize with him then and now as he fights advanced prostate cancer. But we cannot ignore the actions and decisions that were made when he could not face the truth or the truth was kept from him, negatively impacting millions upon millions of Americans. In any retelling of stories, there may be efforts to shed light on the behaviors of people easier to dispense with. Easy to tell the truth now about a person who will never run for another political office, will no longer hold a position of power other than the esteem of being a former president, but the others may get off without accountability because they have a future. Not just the aides that are anonymously speaking, protecting their viability to work in future administrations. I guess they may be banking on Bernie Sanders as the next mental mush that can be managed in the same way. There is a sentiment that the rest of the Democrats had no clue or were managed to a point that interactions would not give off clues that were alarming. But I still have doubts that the people who paraded to morning talk shows and other press circuits claiming Biden was sharp as a tack or quick-witted were completely unaware. Do you really want us to believe that they could not spot a note card and never questioned why he needed them for press conferences, cabinet meetings, and their individual meetings? It seems like they knew and just did not care, while having a plan B that Biden may have thwarted because of staying in the race too long. A good read or listen if you want some insight on the handling of our former president. But still more questions exist.
A key takeaway is how the interest of one person and their family clouded the well-being of their political party and even the nation as a whole. It is human nature to want to retain power and enjoy all the benefits and elegance associated with being the head of state for the most powerful nation on earth and the greatest economy in the world. The hardest thing to do is step aside and let someone else more capable fill your spot. In our earliest history, the only person willing and able to do this was George Washington, who had enough of the early political setting after 2 terms and willingly walked away. Some presidents vowed to only serve 1 term and return to private life. But those also were simpler times. If you accept his notion to run in 2020, then it may make sense. Even with some question his stamina and energy, he still was the best candidate amongst the field of radical Democrats running during that cycle. He was the only one that had centrist or center-left credentials that could connect him with the lineage of Democrats. For core Democrats, the messaging from many in that cycle was far from what they knew the party to be. Even though it is clear that the party started to veer leftward, Biden did appear to be the sane mind during the 2020 cycle of Soviets vying for the Democratic crown. Unfortunately, he governed like those simple minds that some thought he protected us from. The real damage is not just losing an election or being pushed from the ticket. It is to the credibility of a political party that went along with this. Yes, the book does give Democrats cover, making it seem like they really did not know because of how managed Biden was and how they were prevented from interacting with him. But the reality is that if they really were not in the know, then they were blatantly lying when telling us that he was sharp and doing mental gymnastics away from the cameras. They willingly advance a narrative simply to play party politics or because of their own self-interests. No one even took a chance to challenge an incumbent. While uncommon in the modern era, parties have primaried and defeated sitting presidents in the past. The credibility of the party is damaged by not only the cover-up, but the acts that followed that further eroded the public's trust. The Democratic machine has for a long time controlled the national narratives that influence what the people were allowed to know about their government. The Joe Biden era just failed to hide it like other administrations in the past.
I think we can sympathize with people trying to do right for a person who they support that may not be in their full capacity. Rather than push him out unceremoniously at the start, they do what they can to help make him get through the day-to-day, until there was no ability to hide the truth anymore. So in a way, these staffers were being compassionate to some degree. What was not really compassionate was the outcomes of their scheme, the impact their deceit had on others, not only their deceit, but how long they tried to remain in power. Once the debate happened, there was no unseeing what we all saw and heard. There has not been a moment so definitively negative probably since the first televised debate where Richard Nixon did not broadcast well to the audience. Despite the Hollywood intervention and the acting classes to help his performance, Biden simply could not live up to the moment, one that was unreasonably early. Strategically thinking here for a moment, if he would have not pushed for an early debate, the dramatically horrible debate performance would have occurred while early voting was already taking place. Way too late for any talk of replacement. Now, this is about the book. Consider how the fight to remain on the ticket and all that inactivity and indecision, the effect it had on the eventual replacement in Kamala Harris, who would have still had an uphill battle even if he immediately bowed out. But the wait made the matter much worse, and when the decision was finally made, he still was slow to agree to endorse her. While I may be willing to see the compassion argument, I cannot overlook the dishonesty, especially the confirmation that Biden was not being told the truth. They allowed him to make a fool of himself with statements about polls that did not exist, such a shameful betrayal of their boss and the American people. The end effect is that the American voters, especially moderate Democrats, will be wary of anyone betting their chest as a progressive die-hard. You cannot trust the words, ideas, and behaviors of the modern-day progressives. I would recommend that you give the book a try. Despite wanting to move from this messy era, it was worth hearing what happened, although I have my doubts that it was the complete story, as it makes the whole cover-up seem to be conveniently narrow in scope.
A big thank you to all of you in the audience. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. Please follow the Christopher Peter Review on social media and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Please like, follow, and subscribe to the Christopher Peter Review on YouTube. Thank you once again. Until next time.